Hi everyone, I'm Thomas Palaskis. I am a real estate broker, investor, and entrepreneur. I'm also the owner of the brand called Palaskis Realty and the Palaskis Realty team at Keller Williams. As an investor, I've flipped 3 properties and own 5 rentals right now. As a real estate broker, I've sold over 100 houses this year and about 600 houses throughout my career. Throughout that journey, I learned a lot of things, such as learning from others that have gone before you, who have succeeded in the past, who have failed before you as well. And I learned that they're willing to share their information with us and to help educate us to our own success. So today I'm with a superstar, rock star, who is been in the game for quite some time now, and he's also succeeding at crazy high levels. So today we're sitting with an author. He's also a father. He's also an investor, entrepreneur, multi-millionaire. I couldn't say enough about this guy. His name is Paul Morris. Paul, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. So before we get into all the nitty-gritty interview questions, let's start with, what's the funniest thing that happened to you this week?
So before you gave this great introduction, and one of the things that was going through my head are a couple of things. And first of all, you were talking about your success, the success you've had so far, and how you're looking to get more success. And I was thinking, okay, so this is not the first time we've met.
Right.
We had a meeting before, and you were phenomenally impressive in that meeting.
Oh, thank you so much.
So I think you were impressed by me. That's why you wanted to do this, and I appreciate that and all the things that you said. But also you. You were very, very impressive. Another thing is when you said that I'm so much further along in the game, one of the things I was thinking is, how old are you?
I'm 30 years old now.
30 years old, okay. So 30 years old, I think you might be ahead of the game. You might be ahead of me in the game. So I'm a lot further down the road. So the funniest thing that happened this week was when somebody asked me what the funniest thing was that happened to me this week, and I just turned the whole thing around on them.
Funniest thing happened at that moment.
I did, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about yourself, where you came from, maybe where you grew up, your family life, and a little bit about your life before you might have been considered so successful.
One of the things is that this sort of success in a way, just like failure, it seems to happen gradually then suddenly. Mm-hmm. And it comes out of a Hemingway novel, but it's a great metaphor. And that's that we take lots and lots of small steps, incremental steps along the way, and then suddenly, okay, here we are. And it's the same way, I look at it as a vicious cycle, which we've all heard of, and that's sort of you make one bad decision, and then you make another little bad decision, and then another one. Sort of had this downward spiral, and almost always, even where there's a very negative anecdote like that, there's always the positive. And so I find that a virtuous cycle is the opposite of a vicious cycle. So these things happen a little bit at a time, and that's cool because you can do a little bit every day. So the first property that I bought was a duplex that I bought with my best friend.
You just jumped into that. I was going to ask you that next because it's interesting that you brought that up. The first property I bought was a duplex with a partner. Was all cash when I was 21 years old. Right. And then when I was researching into you, I was like, oh, this is so cool.
Yeah.
I can model myself after him, and we're already doing it.
Yes,
so I thought that was really cool. So tell me about that. Tell me, how did it make you feel, your first property? Tell me, was there any fear going on? How did you feel when you bought that first piece of property?
It's funny. It's funny you said it because you said how did it feel? And the funny thing is that being 20 years, that happened 20 years ago, or maybe it happened 30 years ago, 25 years ago. So that happened 25 years ago. And looking back at it, my gut reaction to answer you is like, oh, it felt great.
Right.
But the truth is, and that's what I was thinking, when you said, was there fear involved, was really, yes, there was fear involved. Absolutely.
And that's the reason I asked that question because, I've purchased about 8 properties throughout my career. And I'm going to be totally honest, every time I bought a house or a property, I was completely terrified every single time. Like, what am I doing? But every time it was the best thing I ever did. So that's why I wanted to see what was your take on it, especially your first one.
And what happens if you bought one that really turned out badly? And what do you do with that information, because that certainly can't happen.
Right.
In fact, you're more likely to your first purchase to fail than subsequent purchases because you learn along the way.
Right, exactly.
So what do you do with that? And I was just having a conversation with a friend right before we got here, and he was saying to me, it's fear that really stands in our way of accomplishing things.
Right.
And so it's very easy to just say, like, throw fear aside. But fear is also useful, right?
Right.
So fear saves us from
Exactly, yes.
danger. It saves us from making terrible
Right.
business decisions.
Right.
And we talked quite a bit about the book, and it's interesting to write a book with somebody else. So David Osborne, my co-author, and I are not always on the same page about
Right,
everything.
right.
Very often,
Right.
quite in alignment. But he believes that just go for it. And I'm like, well, what about nerves or fear and that sort of
Right.
thing? And I agree that the best thing to do is to evaluate it and then jump forward. And you'll never know exactly if you feel like you need to know everything going in.
Right.
That's another thing. It might
Analysis
even be
paralysis?
Yeah, and the two are certainly tied together.
Mm-hmm.
How much analysis is the right amount? How much
Right.
is too much? And
Right.
and I do a lot less analysis than most people.
Got
Be
it.
very
I definitely know fear was one of my big things standing in my way, and also fear was my big motivator, because if I
Sure.
didn't do that, then where was my life going to end up? So
Sure.
fear is something that motivates me to go and also holds me back.
Sure.
So it's a love-hate relationship. So when did you consider yourself successful?
One of the things is that and I can just answer these questions,
Mm-hmm.
but a lot of times I do think about them in anecdotes and thoughts and feelings. And I have one of my mentors is in his 80s, and I don't see him that often, but he's a fabulous real estate syndicator. And
Okay, nice.
One of the things that he said, and one of the things that his team said about him is, his name is Sam, my dad's name too, at this real estate syndicator. He said, I come into work every day like I'm starting from the beginning. And there's also a yoga. One of the pillars of yoga is to have a beginner's mind.
Okay.
It doesn't mean you throw away all of your knowledge, but you understand that there's so much more to learn.
So what you're saying is, even though you are successful, you're still coming at it every day, that you're
Yeah.
searching for that
Sure.
success. You're pushing for it.
As soon as you think that you know everything,
Right.
you will, by definition, stop learning.
Exactly.
And so, what is success? And a question. There's a lot of power in questions, and a question that somebody taught me was, the question will sound familiar, but I'm not going to use it in the way that most people use it. The question is, how does it get any better than this?
Mm-hmm.
And most people say that when they're like, oh, hey, I'm at the World Series with my friends, and it's like, oh, I just got a big hit, and like, how does it get any better than this?
Right.
And so that's a rhetorical question, saying like it doesn't get any better. But interestingly,
Exactly.
it actually does not get better as soon as you think that there's nothing better. So even when things are bad, it's obvious. You go like, wow, how does it get any better than this? And whatever questions you ask, your brain will search for the answers.
Right.
Yeah. So if you're in a low spot and you're like, hey, how does it get any better than this? And your brain will start conjuring up answers. Interestingly, when you're in a great place,
Mm-hmm.
and you say it with genuine curiosity,
Mm-hmm.
hey, how do I? This is awesome, and how does this get better?
Right.
You can really still learn quite a bit.
Gotcha.
So success. You said, when did I sort of see myself as successful? It's always a work in progress,
Right.
and I'm enjoying the process. And
Exactly.
There's always more. From where I sit right now, there's more.
Yeah, you look, I mean, like myself, my friends are like, oh, you're so successful, I can't believe you've done all this, and you're so doing this, and I'm like, well, you guys looking at me? You don't see Bill Gates, you
Sure.
don't see,
Sure.
all Donald Trump. I mean, there's so
Sure.
many more people that we can always be looking up to going, am I really successful? It's a comparison almost sometimes, like, there's always going to be someone ahead
Sure.
of you, and so that's awesome. Thanks for sharing that with me. So,
And do you think it's bad to compare? Is it bad to compare, or is it good to compare?
in my opinion, I would say no, it's not bad to compare. I compare myself a lot, but the thing is, I'm always comparing myself to someone new. Or a group that's new, a different group. Why? Because I take myself to that level, and then once I reach that level, like recently even, I reached a certain level, and I was like, okay, so now what do I do? And it's kind of like, oh, I kind of lost some momentum.
Sure.
And then I was like, my problem is I didn't set another goal. I haven't set more competition. I haven't gone after the next big win. And so that's when I was like, okay, let me go down, sit down and go after the next big win, the next competitor and everything like that. So in my opinion, definitely it's good to compete.
Yeah.
So what does a day in the Paul Morris shoes look like, and how do you make it productive?
One of the questions I like to ask people when I'm trying to learn about their career is there's sort of the cocktail party version, elevator pitch version of what you do versus like, well, what's a real day look like? What does it look like when you come in? I don't really have a typical day, and I'm not just dodging that question. In a way, I don't have a typical day because I prefer that diversity. Now that being said, I do have structure to it. So Mondays, I have a call with owners of the offices. And then I have a coaching call, and every day at 4 o'clock I do a call with the managers of the offices. So I do have structure to it.
Awesome.
But in between, there's a lot of different things happening. But one of the things that I like about being interviewed by someone smart like you, or teaching something or teaching great material, is I'm learning. I'm learning while I do it. I'm reminding myself while I'm doing it. So if you don't have if you have a day that's absolutely planned out, cradle to grave, then you're going to be very purposeful. People tend to be very purposeful in a day like that. With a day that's totally free structure, the circumstances will take your day over, and the circumstances, rather than you, will drive that.
Exactly.
So if you want to drive your own day, then you create a schedule and you schedule it out. Now, interestingly, right back to the first thing that we talked about was gradually then suddenly, is that having one very purposeful day will not take you very far down the road. Having a succession of very purposeful days will take you further down the road than you've imagined. So, and it's another sort of human bias, is we overestimate, and it's yet another thing that stands in the way of people's success, I believe, is we overestimate the amount that we should be able to accomplish in a short period of time. So like a month or a year or 6 months, we overestimate that, and conversely, I believe we underestimate the things that we can accomplish. So if you really, if you're talking to folks that really want to make it happen, you really want to make it happen, I would suggest a day that's very structured.
It could be very tedious, and for a lot of people, even sometimes like myself, until it's a huge habit, it can be tough. So how do you stay purposeful? How do you keep that mindset? Is there any rituals or things that you do that?
Well, again, great question. And any time that there's something that we feel like we want to do, and we hold the idea that that's really tough, and I get it. That's the reason why my day's not more structured than it is. One of the things I started out saying is that, hey, listen to what I'm about to say, but don't necessarily do what I do, because it actually would move the ball further down the road for me. I kind of prefer having a little less structure in my day than moving that much further faster. I may, after this interview, I may rethink that. Seriously, I'm not kidding. Really, I'm like, okay, that was interesting. So I think more purposeful days would serve me better.
Got it.
The other thing is, anytime you're faced with something that you believe you want to do, and you also believe it's a challenge or hardship or whatever, is you just ask yourself, well, how do I create it? So how would I create a very purposeful day without it being a hardship? How do I create a purposeful and joyous day? How do I create a purposeful and energizing day?
Got it.
And none of these questions have to have an answer, right? Just ask them. You will get the answer. Remember the converse, is that where I said where there's negative things, you can always have a positive thing. Well, where there's positive things, there's a negative thing too. And if you ask yourself questions like, I leave things places. So sometimes I used to, I still leave things places, but I would say oh my gosh, how could I have done this again, or something like that. So
right.
your brain's going to manufacture an answer to that.
Right.
If you really want to change it, you might say like, how would I do it differently?
Right.
How would I, just ask a different question.
Ask a better question that encourages mine to make it better the next time around.
For sure.
Yeah. You oversee somewhere around 9,000 realtors, is that right?
Yes, it's over 10,000.
Oh, over 10,000 now. Okay, it's growing all the time.
Who's counting, right?
Who's counting? 10,001 just now. And over 700 units in your portfolio, is that right?
700 rental units. And overseeing 10,000 realtors, it's not really overseeing them. I have an oversight responsibility for the offices.
Right.
And how the offices are doing, and there's 10,000 realtors. So, yes, in a way, for sure.
In a way, yes. You manage the people who manage the people, right?
For sure.
Okay, that makes perfect, and that's still a huge thing. How do you, with so much on your plate, and this might go back to the last question we asked, but with so much on your plate, so much going on, how do you stay focused?
So one tool that's been very useful for me is called the Covey Quadrant, and I actually write it out. Just knowing it is also very helpful, and carrying that forward. And there are two axes, and one is important, and the other is urgent.
Okay.
So that will create 4 blocks, and
Okay.
you'll have things that are urgent and important, and things that are urgent but not important.
Okay.
Then you have on the other axis, you have important but not urgent, and then you have not important, not urgent. And then having awareness of how that affects you. And so and I like to make it so people can really understand. So here's what urgent means.
Okay.
Urgent means somebody is chasing after you and pulling your shirt, like, hey Thomas, hey, I gotta tell you something, hey. You're like, okay, right? Now it could be one of two things. It could be important or not important.
Right.
But it's still urgent because they're tugging on your lapel. Okay? So things that are important and urgent. It's like, hey Thomas, here's this thing, it's really important.
Right.
The important and urgent stuff you get to.
Right.
The tricky part is that we tend to spend time, and that's time well spent. And the tricky part is the other 2 quadrants where people are tugging at your shirt, but it's not important.
Right.
So there's something that could wait till tomorrow, something that the problem may go away, something that doesn't need your action now, something that you can delegate to somebody else, but they're like, hey Thomas, you're like, and it's almost easier to just answer them, right?
Right.
So that's how I get sucked into the urgent but not important quadrant. The urgent important I get sucked into, and that's a good thing. I also get sucked into the urgent not important, and that's when I want to have awareness of keeping that away. And then another really important quadrant is the stuff that's important but not urgent.
I'm your assistant. I come knocking on your door, and I say, hey, this is the issue. What is going on through your mind? Because I know you're sitting there and you have to determine what quadrant does this go in. So how do you analyze that and say, hey, I'm gonna put this aside right now, or I'm gonna take action right now?
So it's a great question, and if my assistant knocks on the door too many times with something that's not important, that's a problem, right? Okay. So I'm gonna fish that out. But I think your question underlying that, which is how do we know what's important and what's not important? In business, it would be the top 20% of things. So I'll give you a concrete example there, and that would be like lead generation. In real estate sales, lead generation is the most important thing.
Right.
So interestingly, it's not urgent. Yeah, that's that other quadrant. There's a quadrant that gets a lot of attention that should. There's a quadrant that gets attention and shouldn't. And then there's another quadrant that does not get attention but should. So lead generation is one of those. So what we do is, here's when lead generation gets urgent. We can't pay our bills. You're like, wow, I got a lead generated. Oh my gosh, right? When you have a bunch of deals in the pipeline, when you're working on deals, you got some deals in the pipeline, the urgency of lead generation goes down, but it's not less important.
Right.
And back to sort of the relational one would be, if the principal of the school calls and says like, hey, your daughter, right? I'm like, okay, that's urgent and important.
Okay, gotcha.
But there's a lot of activities at school
Mm-hmm.
that a lot of dads don't go to.
Right, right.
So if I went to none of them, that would be bad, right? And if
Right,
I went to
right.
all of them, that would be highly unusual. So how do you figure it out? So one of the things that I do, especially where we're not naturally good, just saying, hey, you know what? I'm not naturally good at this, okay? And then creating a system that creates success for you.
Okay.
So in the important, not urgent stuff would be like going to my daughter's school activities. And sometimes it's without her. It's like a lecture that the school's putting on. That's good stuff.
Got it.
So there's really no accountability. My daughter's not even
Right, not
knowing
even
that
there,
I'm
right,
not
exactly.
there. You know, so that's important, but definitely not urgent. It's just a system. And one of the things I do is I just have my executive assistant put in my calendar all of those school things.
There we
And
go.
because 100% of them are in my calendar, first of all, they're not getting scheduled over. And secondly, you know, I look down at my calendar and go, oh, you know, hey, there's that meeting at my daughter's school, and they got this cool lecture, but it's all the way across town, and I don't feel like going, blah, blah, blah. That's fine, because I go, because they're in my schedule and they don't get scheduled over, I tend to go to like 90%.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And then the craziest thing happens, and this is when, you know, just take notice. Craziest thing happens is like dads who would be way more on it than me, naturally. And they are way more. They go to like 60% of the stuff or whatever.
Right.
They're like, Paul, you're making us look bad. You're at all the stuff. Like I get the text message from my wife. She's like, well, Paul's here. You know, like it's like, what are you doing to us? You know, and I'm just like, and I listen to that. And you could do a couple of things. You go like, oh, well, I have a system for that or whatever. You know, I've learned to just say like, hey, thank you.
Thank
you know,
you.
cool. You know, I just I'll take credit. I'll let that land on me. It's not my natural style.
So it sounds a little bit like your assistant even might filter some of that stuff for you.
Sure.
So she's almost putting certain things in certain quadrants for you. You don't even have to think about it.
Absolutely. And if she's not, then we're not doing it right.
Right.
So one of the things is a huge time waster is email.
Oh yeah.
And she goes through all my emails and puts stuff in a review folder. And I generally only look at the review folder. I don't delete anything. I don't touch it. And so that's a way for me to
I'm the
stay
same.
out of the weeds.
My assistant filters through the emails.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, responds to the emails.
Yeah.
And once in a while, I see an email because
Yeah.
it's something that just really needs my attention.
And I haven't gotten to that level that she's really responding to them for me, and it would be great if I got there. So that'll be
awesome.
I'll take another note from you today. Right, that's what we're doing. You're gonna get the real purposeful calendaring. That was one of them, and then the other one is that we'll get Chastity to respond. But whenever I share a perspective, you know, I always want there to be something actionable.
What was one of the defining moments in your life that really pushed you to get uncomfortable and to just knock over obstacles and boundaries of maybe some things that you thought you couldn't achieve and actually achieve them?
You know, when you look back on it, there are many defining moments, and you can learn from great decisions you've made. Oftentimes, I feel like I learn from mistakes I've made if you have that willingness to look at it. And just knowing that we all make mistakes, and maybe what defines us is not the mistakes that we make, but what we do after the mistake. In the times of my life that people have said he'll never amount to anything, there have been some important people in my life that have said that. Not often, not many, but there's been a couple of watershed moments. I never said like, oh, I'm going to prove that guy wrong, and then think about it. You know, you hear the story of the guy that was thrown out of the restaurant as a kid and worked, you know, hard, you know, fired as a busboy and goes back and buys the restaurant. And that just wasn't my journey. You know, when people said like he'll never make it, I was like, huh. You know, they don't know what they're talking about.
Really know, right.
And that's a good ego resilience that I got from my parents, which was very helpful. And one of the things that's very, very helpful is aspirational direction. It would have to come from somebody who you think is really talented, and they go like, "Hey, Thomas, you know, I know you can do it, or I know you can do this or that," and that's pushed me along a lot more than that. So
negative. Encouragement has pushed you more.
Yeah, and it's like encouragement. It's encouragement. The best kind of encouragement that I ever got was somebody who I viewed as very important or very smart. That was like, I know you can do it. I had a friend of my mom's who was one of the first women television producers and movie producers ever. There's just no women in that field. And she just had such, and it wasn't just the way she was, because I watched her be not so aspirational about other people.
Right.
And she's just like, oh no, him, that one, I'd be like this, so she's like, him, you don't have to worry about that one. He's good.
Right.
He'll be fine,
Right.
And I was just like, wow, why does this
Person,
important lady think that? I do that to others. I pay that forward.
Right.
But in the same way, I don't do it unless I believe it.
And you believe
I just told you the way it works for me.
Right.
Aspirationally. And then you said, like, wow, yeah, I get that. That's happened for me too. If you had said to me, I have a, very important uncle that said, like, you're never going to be anything, and it motivates me like you can't believe, I wouldn't say, like, well, that's a negative motivation.
Right.
I think that's great. That's awesome if that works for you, and that would tell me something a little different, and I believe it about you anyway, is that you said it already, is that you're very competitive. So probably if somebody was like, you're never going to be anything, you'd probably be like, you know what, I'll show them. and that's okay too. The question is it working, right? Is your life working? Are you getting where you want to go? Are you happy? Are you happy on the journey? And if your answer is like, yeah, it's working, I would never tell someone to suggest to someone that they should do it differently. Here's the suggestion, is a question. The question would be, what could you do or be different that would have you hit your goal of $10 million with ease or sooner or without heartache or however you want it,
Right.
And if you don't have to have an answer for that. But if you ask that question every day, I just think,
and I love that
you
mentioned that you don't have to have an answer.
Yeah.
Just ask the right question.
And I'll give you another question that I was very hesitant. It was going through my brain. I was very hesitant because I don't speak it, but I'll speak it now because it has a negative effect on me. That's why I don't speak it. But it probably won't for folks that are listening because it's not their question. Why am I such an idiot? I've really rinsed my brain and my language. It's not to say that I never ever say it. But every once in a while.
Well, you'll catch yourself. You'll be careful. You'll rephrase the question.
And I saw it, and it's when you open your eyes to that sort of thing, it's amazing what you'll see. And I was at the grocery store, and there was a woman, elderly woman, she'd been 80 years old or whatever, and she did something, bumped something, dropped something, whatever it was. It was pretty minor. And she goes, why am I such an idiot? And I was like, wow, 80 years old, and that's the question you're asking yourself.
Right.
The cool thing about it, I've been thinking about it more and more, is just really treating yourself better. And one of the things that I see, and I offer this to people to look at, is that people who are mean, people who are just angry or whatever, are generally very, very, as hard as they are to other people, they're harder on themselves.
Right.
And I do think that we all come from a place of, I don't want to be mean to people. I want to have a positive impact on people. I really think the first place to do that is to be really kind to yourself.
As an entrepreneur, what's one habit that you have that you would recommend others like myself taking on as their own habit?
And one of them is just the business planning. So a lot of folks are really good at what they're doing, and in the book we talk about that as ground game.
Okay.
So you're like grinding away, you're making it happen. You have to have great ground game to be successful. And then if you're not stopping and taking a 20,000 foot view of your business once in a while, I think you're missing out. So scheduling a time where you take that view of your business.
How often do you do that?
I do it fairly often. Again, it's not something that I would tend to do on my own, so I use coaches
keep you accountable.
My team to help me with that. Yeah, coaches to say like, hey, what's budget,
What was one of the first big purchases that you made? And okay, so I just bought an Audi R8. Because I hit my goal, I was like, okay, when I hit my goal, I'm getting this car. What was one of the biggest and first purchases that you made to reward yourself?
Well, that's the Audi R8 is great because it was actually one of the things that I was going to reward myself with, and then did not. So there was a period of time. This is where I said it's cool to me that you at your age, you said that you have, so much further to go, but you at your age versus me at my age, I think you're way ahead of the game. And it wasn't that long ago, 8 or 9 years ago, I was like, an Audi R8 is really what I'd like to have.
Uh-huh.
And my coach was good. And I coached I just can't see doing it because there's so much more that I have to do. There's so much.
Right.
Like, what would it take? Like, so right now for me, people get very motivated by material stuff, and there's nothing wrong with that. Remember, it's back to what we talked about. Whatever motivates you, what you want in your life. I'm just saying, there's no judgment, and I encourage people to go for what they want. Right now, having a jet would be like it'll be nice, right? But there's so much more. Like, I almost feel like I want to change the world a bit before I go for that kind of expenditure that I really see as not being a necessity.
Could buying a jet help you change the world?
It could, and that's a great that's a great way to look at it for sure.
Right.
And also, what sort of time would you buy back if I were traveling?
Right, exactly.
So there are those things. I'm always learning. One of the things I learned from somebody else was that they spend money. They are very wealthy and successful. And in answer to this question, they just said experiences rather than things.
Okay.
And I like things, and then when I buy the things, and then I get excited about the things, and then I don't use the things, and I buy some more things, and I get excited. I get excited by them, and it's like eventually the things don't motivate me. Right. So, and I heard Gary Keller one time say, after you reach a certain amount of wealth, you're just getting more of the same. It's like, if you love cars, I know you love cars. Like, how many cars are you gonna have? You can only drive one at a time. I have 2 cars. I have one that's a great race car like the R8, and I never drive it ever. So what would another car do for me? So I'd like to have it. So I have a nice car, but it's like, once you have one nice car, then how much do you get from the second nice car, the third nice car? So experiences, and recently, and I hesitated for sure, but I love classic rock. I've seen great classic rock shows. And one guy I hadn't seen was Tom Petty. And then I finally went to see him, but I had lousy seats, and so I considered it still like kind of not seeing him. And then I'm like, he's coming to the Hollywood Bowl. I went on, the app and there were second row center seats, and they're like $2,200 a seat or something like that. It was astronomical. It might have been $1,100 a seat, so I had to buy 2. It was $22, whatever it was. I looked at it, I was like, okay. Like, I cannot justify this, right? And then I was like, you know what, to heck with it, I'm going to do it. And I sat in the second row center with Tom Petty, and he died like 5 days later.
There you go.
And I'll never look back at that and say, you know what, I shouldn't have spent that $2,200. It was an epic experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, and again, creating experiences. I did that with my girlfriend, create that experience with my girlfriend, create a great experience with, I saw literally the last Kanye West concert with my daughter.
Tell me a little bit about a time in your life where you feel you failed, or maybe an experience where you think you did fail, and what did you do to overcome that and turn it into a positive?
A failure is a true loss if you don't learn a lesson from it.
Right.
So what is the thing? The main contributor to it not working, and how do you change that moving forward? So
that's the question you put behind a moment like that.
Absolutely. And and there's a couple of things about it. Number one is, if you don't do that, then you have a failure, which is a true failure. We learn so much through our own pain. One of the ways that I've found to limit that pain is to have an openness to watch somebody else and say, it's like, you read enough stories about like the cancer or heart attack that changed somebody from a mean person to, I wrote about in the book,
about the policeman, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I was young when I saw that, and I was like, all right, I'm not waiting for the heart attack. Because what happened at the end of the story is like, he's the meanest cop I've ever met my whole life, and then he became the nicest guy in the whole world after he had the big heart attack. But he only lived like 3 years, and then he died, then he really died.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, so he learned the big lesson.
He learned his lesson.
And then I really think I was like 14 or 15 years old. I'm like, I'm not going to wait for the heart attack for that to happen.
What inspired you to write your book, Wealth Can't Wait?
So in part it's leaving a legacy. The other thing too is, as so many things are, it's sort of born out of a necessity in a way. Great things can come out of weaknesses, right? So here I am running a real estate company, and one of the ways to contribute to realtors is to teach them. But there's so many people that are better at teaching a listing presentation or a buyer's consultation. So many are better than me than that. So what am I going to do? Learn the listing presentation better than somebody who's been doing it for 30 years and then teach it? It didn't make sense. And the one thing that I found was that as we teach realtors to do better, as we teach salespeople to do better, what they do is they increase in income, but it doesn't always mean they increase in wealth. And so that was something that I was able to accomplish, was with a smaller amount of income, building wealth over time. And so I started teaching that, and then that became coursework that I then turned into a book, which hopefully is some sort of a legacy.
What would you want readers to take away after reading it?
The one thing, and I touch on it a lot, so I won't go deep into it, is rather than a prescription. One of the things we sort of set out to do is like, let's have a prescription for success. I want to extend an invitation, not a prescription.
Got it.
It's like, here's the way to do it. That creates the supposed to, I should have, whatever. Here's a way. This is a way that I believe will help. And it's up to them to accept it or not accept it, or take, if somebody takes 3 or 4 pieces out of it. Yeah, sure.
That's definitely.
And so
you want them to get what they need out of that makes
that's correct. And have an impact in that way.
If you had to start again, what would you do differently?
I would start being more honest with myself about what I want, and being truer to that, because at the end of the day, I think it really truly is hard. Life is hard. Life's hard when you're leading somebody else's life. Figure out what it is that you want to do, that you believe you could be great at and love it, and go for it.
So be honest with yourself and just really go after it and focus on what your goals are. That's awesome. I think one of the things that I would have done differently is I would have spent a lot more time, not saying I didn't spend a lot of time with people that have gone before me, but I think I would spend a lot more time and a lot more purpose with those people.
Again, I think that's a fabulous perspective, and how do we set that into motion? And there are a lot of people that say, hey, we like to come down and interview you, and one of the things you said is like, hey, I have to talk to your assistant, or you're busy, or whatever. And part of it is just putting the barriers up, because otherwise I'd be doing interviews all the time, wouldn't be working. So why do I say yes to you and not yes to others? So a great way to have conversations with people that you want to have is to be who they would want to spend time with. Now, maybe I look at the situation, I go, I really want to, so I met Sam Zell, he's a billionaire, and I'm like, well, I want Sam Zell to spend some time with me. Well, what do I need to do? Who do I need to be, in order? And then I might look at it and go, I'm not really into that, so forget it. I'm not saying, change yourself, but I will say this, and a more concrete way of saying it is people who have a lot more success than you tend to be pretty purposeful. And it can take them off of their journey to have this conversation. So coming from contribution, with you, it's just like I see you as so purposeful and driven in your own life that I'm happy to take the time with you for sure to spend that. And giving and receiving are simultaneous. So I'm getting a lot out of this. But I've also had the situation where somebody, slipped through the cracks or harangued us enough that we got the lunch appointment, and then I'm sitting at lunch with them, and I'm there for 5 minutes. I'm like, how did this happen? Because they're like, well, my real estate business is terrible, but I want to be in management. And I'm like, okay, how's that going to work? They want to like manage other people to do better in their real estate business when their business is terrible. And they tell me like the 125 reasons why their business is bad. And I'm like, okay, so how do I get out of this? And I had to have systems for that. So, awesome. People are genuinely, it's just human nature. People are more interested in themselves than they are in me. And so, I'll give you a question, which is, how do I earn the right to have coffee with you, or how do I earn the right to? So it's coming from a place of contribution. I almost always get a yes from that. And then I would do some research, and I'd think about, what does that person love, or what is that, what can I do for that? You might think like I might think, oh, I can't do anything for a billionaire.
Right,
But I already
right,
know that's
right.
not true.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because a lot of this was going through my mind where I'm like, hey, I'm gonna get back in the room with Paul,
Sure.
whatever it takes. And honestly, in my mind, I was like, okay, he's gonna turn me down about 5 to 10 times, but he's gonna be like, this guy won't leave me alone.
Disappoint you.
No, not at all. So that's part of what was kind of going through my mind is what's the next step of getting in
Sure.
just to talk to you even,
Sure.
just to and interview and have these questions where I can learn and grow. What goals do you have now? Because we see you as someone who's very highly successful, who has done the things that we wish that we can do, or we hope that we're going to be doing. So now, what goals do you have?
The experiences of a higher level of success and having the growth and taking the impact. So taking people along with me, but even that I've learned recently. I'm just thinking about it more and more. I've lost interest in taking the unwilling and working on making them willing. I'm just like, forget it.
Yes.
I'll take the willing and help
Yep.
them achieve something more, and it's better use of my time, it's better use of their
Right.
time. We talked about the gradually then suddenly over time. We overestimate what we can accomplish in a short amount of time and underestimate what we can in a long period of time. The same thing I find it to be very similar with people, so that to expect somebody to be different tomorrow than they were today is a losing battle. To expect that you're going to show up different tomorrow than you will be today, I found is a losing battle. I found that we massively overestimate the impact we can have on other people, and we really underestimate the impact we can have on ourselves. So if I'm really interested in some sort of change and expecting somebody else to change,
Right.
forget it. But where I would go is working toward a change for myself. Like, what strengths do we have right now?
Exactly.
And how are we going to utilize them?
Yes.
Because I know that the strengths that I have today, if we're going to create stuff for me to do tomorrow and you're going to create it in my strength zone, I'm probably going to crush it. If you want me to be different tomorrow, and I want to be different tomorrow, and crush something not in my strength zones today, so you have a natural ability to connect with people, and to take somebody that has a natural ability to connect with people and teach them how to be a better connector is like, wow, it's like throwing gasoline on a fire that you want to grow. And taking somebody who's very awkward around people and trying to get them to, now they can do better.
Yes, right,
they can
right.
do better. And if I had a friend that was super awkward around people, it would be a nice thing to say, hey, here are some tools for you.
Right.
But to expect them to crush it at that.
Right, and it's a total 360 for some people, and expect them to just totally turn around.
Yeah.
I definitely hear where you're coming from. So what is your vision for the next 5 years, or just for the future? The Paul Morris life. What is your vision?
Well, I wish you could
it has
remember
to be
what were
huge.
those. No, but what were those three things? It's to have amazing experiences, to have a huge impact, and there was a third. I know there was, right? It was impact, experience, and something else.
Yeah. What advice do you give to someone who might be getting into real estate or into wanting to start a business or get into sales? What advice do you have for them?
So it's probably the same advice that I give to anyone looking to go into anything, and that's the first thing is, and you touched on it before, is just that people have gone before you.
Right.
So there's so much amazing lessons out there, so that you do not have to reinvent the wheel. Some of the best companies, Keller Williams, Gary Keller studied a lot of really successful companies and figured out which parts of it worked. So you could create massive, new, innovative success without having a new idea. I'm not saying that Gary didn't have a new idea, I'm just saying you don't need a new idea.
Right.
Study the people who have done it before, and then always having a learning-based attitude, so a willingness to learn and then get into action. Stop planning and act.
Right.
And then be willing to fail, or make mistakes, right? So if you take 3 steps forward and takes 2 steps back, I'm like, wow, that's cool. At least you took 3 steps forward, right? Maybe you take 3 steps forward and 4 steps backwards. Wow, at least you took 3 steps forward. So what can we do to make the effort go further, or to change the actions a little bit so you don't take so many backwards? And that's really for any career, but certainly for a sales career. And I do believe that that understanding yourself is very important. So a behavioral analysis tool like a DISC profile or the KPA, Keller Personality Assessment. Those are tools that will really help you. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. We do want to let the audience know about his book, Wealth Can't Wait. It can be purchased at Amazon.com. That's a good place to purchase it, right?
Yes, sure.
You can also follow Paul Mark Morris. Is that right? On
That's
Instagram.
correct, yes.
So if you're on Instagram, Paul Mark Morris. You can also follow me. I am Tom Paul. You already know my Facebook and YouTube channel, so make sure to like and subscribe.
So I found today's discussion to be very educational, and I hope that somebody else does also.
Awesome.
Okay, thanks.